Okay, and we're away. So thank you for joining us. Some of today will be a little bit practical. Hey, Alan. Some of it is going to be a little bit more experiential, where I want input from you guys. So the very practical stuff is just about the way the class spaces are organized and so on. When people have been ticking off the supervision roles, hang on, sorry, I'm just going to mute my phone. When people are ticking off the supervision, not the supervision roles, the documents in Sonia, there are three categories: satisfactory, not satisfactory, and outstanding. Can I get you to mute, Alan? We're just picking up a wee bit of cute children noise in the background.
Okay.
You should have a mute button which will take out any background noise if that helps. Okay, so with those three categories, satisfactory, not satisfactory, and outstanding, please don't tick outstanding. It doesn't mean brilliant. It doesn't mean this is outstandingly good. It just means they haven't been submitted. The documents are standing outside of the system. And that just threw everyone. I don't know how we ended up with that. But really the only two that you need to be ticking is this is satisfactory or this is not satisfactory. And not satisfactory means they've done something significantly wrong. If they haven't submitted something, then it is actually outstanding. But we really should only be using those first two buttons. All the students should have the forms into Sonia by the end of term. So that's that one. That's easy. For everyone who supervised this term, can I say a huge thank you for getting everything done on time. It was the most successful term I've ever had of people getting through all of the various bits and pieces of paperwork. So that made my end of the year hugely successful. So thanks for that. Please do bear in mind that when you're marking, we have a 2-week turnaround, and particularly in these units, the students get quite angsty. They really want to know how they're going. And as they are small groups, you shouldn't have more than 5. If you can do it quicker than 2 weeks, it reduces their anxiety further. Okay, this has been a really contentious part for a while. For anyone who is supervising a unit that has a mid-term assessment, not the midterm review, that's done at the placement agency, but the midpoint assessment of student supervision skills. Up until now, we've been saying grade them as satisfactory if it's good, unsatisfactory if it's not good, or if they haven't been able to prove it. So there are some situations where in a unit that only has 6 sessions, you've only seen them for 3 sessions. The first session, nothing happens because it's you explaining what supervision is. It's the students telling you about their placement agency and their experience and their expectations. But there's not really much of a chance to do any client presentation in that first week. I'd be surprised if anyone gets around to case conceptualization before session 2. Some students don't get given access to their clients until at least session 2, and some not until after that. So you may have had a student who's only able to present 1 case conceptualization, and they may have done a bit of a lame job because they're really not sure what it is. Rather than grading those students as unsatisfactory, can I just get you to tick NA, not applicable? Anything that they're unable to show that they have come up to that level. If they have done 3 case conceptualizations and every one of them has been a disaster, that's not satisfactory. We have kind of a pro forma email or pro forma feedback that we suggest to supervisors, which says something along the lines of, Stuart, at this stage, I can't grade you as satisfactory in this term. That's nothing too concerning. By the end of term, we'll work together to make sure that you're able to present in the format we like, etc., etc. It's supposed to be encouraging supervisees to go, even though I haven't got it at this point, by the end of term, everything's going to be fine. But all they see is unsatisfactory. So rather than grading students and giving them an overall unsatisfactory, if there's anything they haven't quite gotten to, treat them as not appropriate. For the overall mark, if what they have done is satisfactory, they should be graded as satisfactory for that assessment. It's one area that we are getting a lot of angst from students. And what I'm trying to do is to get that assessment task marking criteria changed. So it will say satisfactory, unsatisfactory, unable to be graded at this point. But that has to go through various committees, and hopefully we'll get that done by term 2. So for now, rather than failing someone on something they're unable to present, grade them as satisfactory. What else? Oh yeah. Now someone said at one point last term, the 30-minute session in the final week, and I thought, I didn't think there was a 30-minute session in your unit. And I went in, and it says in the unit, in the online class space, your final session will be 30 minutes. That's actually incorrect. The only unit that has the 30-minute one-on-one session is COUN 3031, Counselling, Placement and Supervision 1. Now, I'll go through all of the online class spaces and change all of those. So for all other units, for 3041, it's a 3-hour session every week. For all of the others in the Masters and the Grad Dip, they're either 2 hours a fortnight or 2 hours a week for the second unit. It's not that 30-minute one-on-one feedback. That's only the first unit of the undergrad. So it won't create any confusion for the students going through, because they won't be expecting anything different. So I'll organise those changes to the class spaces between now and then. Please do make sure that you are ticking off your roles electronically. If they're not done within the week that class happens, and a student is identified as missing 2 sessions, the system will automatically send them an email saying you are at imminent risk of failing. And of course, that puts them straight into panic. So please do make sure that you're up to date with those sessions. In terms of students falling below the 80% attendance, we do have a little bit of negotiation, a little bit of free play. If a student does fall below that and they have to repeat, it's really problematic, because then they have to spend another term on placement. Now that's another 1 or 2 days of their week tied up. It's another placement opportunity that we can't give to another student. So rather than failing a student on falling below that 80%, we have a couple of systems in place. If there's a valid reason, not just they forgot to log in, but if they're dealing with a sick child, or if they've been sick, or if there's a crisis at work that they can't get out of, we will accept them as hitting the attendance. What we would ask you to do is to make contact with the student and find out how they're going. If they say, look, nothing really happened on placement this week. I saw the client I saw last week. We continued the process. It went fine, but nothing new. That's kind of okay. If it's someone who has something a bit more in depth that they need to discuss, then we would ask you to ask them to write a report on it. Take the blogs that they would use and flesh them out of it. So rather than a 150 to 300 word blog, ask for 1,000 words to say, okay, this is what happened. These are the ways I would present a case conceptualization to the group. This is what I'm working on in the future. If they do that, then we're happy. It saves them having to repeat. We're trying to come up with sort of an emergency supervision format, and we're just trying to get HR to figure out how to make this happen. The idea would be, if a student has a situation which comes up with one of their clients and they need a debrief, we're not paying you to go one-on-one with students. It's not fair that we ask you to use that time. if you think, look, a 5-minute phone call is okay, I can do that, and that's all they need, that's fine. But if it's something that's requiring a bit more of an intervention, what we will do is have one person who's actively on call. And this is what HR is trying to figure out. What hours are they on call? How quickly can a student expect a call back? Who pays for the phone? Blah, blah, blah. There's quite a lot of functional aspects that HR need to consider. So even though we asked for that last term, it's probably not going to happen until term 2. But at that stage, we'll let you know if the student says, yes, I was on placement this week and it was a bit distressing, you can say, okay, if it's slightly distressing, fine, type that up and send it to me. If it's something that you need to debrief about, here's the person to call. So that's in process, but HR take a while to figure out how all of that comes together. Now, we did have feedback from one supervisor, which I thought was really apt, and we will change this for term 2. The blogs are effective, but the placement blog, there's not really that much that students can say week after week. So from term 2, I'm going to recommend to the curriculum committee that we pull that back to 2 blogs. They talk about their client work, and they can talk about what they're learning about the placement agency in that, if it's appropriate, and they talk about supervision. I think it's trying to get blood out of a stone to say to students, particularly in the second placement unit, you have to write 300 words every week on an agency that you've been working at for 6 months. Like, what more can they learn? So I don't think there's any need to be giving them that extra work and you that extra sort of anxiety of having to fit all of that in. Okay, look, that's all the practical stuff. I want input from you guys for the rest of the session. And what I want to talk about in specific is managing difficult students. And some of you will have had these, and thankfully few and far between, but boy, when it comes up, it throws everyone. So what we're looking at is making sure that people are aware of what they need to be doing in terms of protecting yourself, because the students will at times attack. They can be very reactive. Over the previous 2 or 3 years, they've been practicing their skills with each other. They've been learning all of this on a theoretical level, and they've had this identity as a student, which a lot of them love. And all of a sudden, we're asking them to make this transition into the identity of a professional. And they realize I'm no longer role-playing with someone. This is actually a divorcing couple. This is someone in rehab who's relapsed. And it's not just if they get the skills wrong, they go, oh, let me try that question again. Suddenly it's live. There's a lot of anxiety for these students. And sometimes you become the target of their reactivity. So can I just hear from some of you about ways in which you have managed students who have made the process difficult? Who's had a difficult one? John?
I think, like in any supervision, what I do is first ask them what were some of the strategies that they used to deal with this particular client or group. And then I will role play it actually in the session itself. I'll get them to be the client, I'll be the counselor, and we'll work it out that way. And then I'll get the other group members to put in what they might have done differently, what situation they've been in that's similar, that sort of thing, so that it's a dynamic sort of process. That's, in a nutshell, how I would do it. I don't know.
What about if it's a student who's becoming quite emotionally reactive, as opposed to just not quite getting it right?
In supervision?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, well, I've been really fortunate. I haven't had any of those.
Give it time.
I haven't had any of those, but if I did, I mean, I would just handle it just like I would with anyone, you know. but it's something it's hard to sort of just make up something if it's not in the moment. So maybe somebody else can come up with a strategy, because I actually have to be in the here and now.
Mm-hmm. Maria? And you need to unmute.
Yeah, I need to unmute myself before I start talking. I guess probably, Paul, I was thinking about one of the students from last semester, and she'd just been through a very traumatic breakup. So she had a lot of personal stuff going on, and to be able to sort of hold her in that space where she wanted to stay within the placement, she didn't want to exit. She was quite clear about that. But she also knew that she had a huge amount of stress that she was sort of carrying throughout this process. And so I encouraged her to actually come on a few minutes earlier than the rest of the group to have a little bit of a chat. And we had a strategy that that if she was going to become emotionally reactive and things were sort of going to fire on her, that she might actually sort of hold herself in that moment, and that we would have a bit of a debrief at the end. But for her, I encouraged her to actually speak into the group, not without speaking to the detail of it, that to actually say that she was in this position, and so that we could rally around her and actually support her through this sort of process, because this is a natural part of life. I've heard some students where they've gone to their supervisors in work, and the supervisors basically said, you've got to get your shit together to turn up on time. And that's, they've been dismissive. And that's not my attitude. My attitude is we're all human beings. There's going to be times in our life where we hurt over different things. And it's our job to sort of collaboratively work together in this process. And none of us are immune to that. So that was the strategy that I employed.
Yeah, and I think that ties into the fact that some of the things that are going to turn up in supervision are about the client who they're working with, and some of the back sort of emotional story that they're going to bring into supervision is what's happening to them in their lives, and whether or not that's clouding their judgment, or whether that's just making them angry with the world and it's suddenly focused on you, and so on.
Yeah.
One thing I really do want to stress, because we've had two particularly difficult students this term, and it's one of them's probably going to go to appeal, and there's been remarks for two cases, and they're really quite emotionally draining for the supervisors as well, because it's the supervisor's skills being called into question when the student is reacting in this way. I think it's vitally important that the minute things start to go wrong, document everything. Write down your complete recollection of the conversation, particular phrases that the student may have said, your emotional response at the time, whether or not the student's raising their voice, whether or not they continually interrupt. It's frustrating if we have to kind of go this very protective route, but I'd rather that if it comes to appeal and you've got a document that says these were the conversations we had every second week, and these were the points where I thought we had a real clarity, and this is when the student told me to fuck off, which they're probably not going to say that, but actually some of them will. But if you can really identify, here's a student who's severely triggered, and I'm seeing, when I try and feed that back to them, this is the response that then came up, and when they received this feedback from their assessment, it then increased. It's really important if we have a very clear document that's dated, that's accurate, that's really going to give us as a school a good leg to stand on if we're going to be challenging their challenge to our mark. We've obviously got the school's reputation to uphold. We don't want to be graduating students who are incompetent or aggressive or unethical. We've got a responsibility, and you guys know all this, to the clients who they're going to work with. You've got a responsibility to your professional reputation, and so we really do want to be protecting that. So I think it's really important that as soon as the situation starts to come up, document it. B, gently bring it to the student's attention. And, that's when you might say, can we have a can we have 5 minutes after the rest of the class finishes? Or maybe you send them that in an email rather than identifying it in the class space. Say, can we have a phone call tomorrow afternoon? And try and get some clarity before it starts to get overheated, because it will get overheated really quickly. One particular situation we had this term was a student who was using some quite esoteric practices, which had really no foundation in anything that ACAP teaches. So we would really recommend that you ask the students to focus in on the core Rogerian principles, particularly if they're undergrads. I think, and of course this is me as a non-counsellor telling you how it works for counselling students, so there's a little bit of self-awareness there that I don't know how this plays out for you guys as well. But they may be at the end of their undergrad degree and they may have done an elective in existential therapy, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be an existential practitioner at that point. If they have done a unit, sure, they can incorporate some of those styles of the modality. But if they've done the undergrad and we don't actually have a unit on Gestalt therapy, they really can't be saying, I use Gestalt techniques with this person because I read the Wikipedia page on Gestalt. Pull them back to just that very simple listening and reflecting and see what they can learn from that, rather than trying to be Fritz Perls from day 3. Are people getting that kind of sense that students are trying too hard?
I'll jump in. Oh, can you hear me? Yep. Hi everyone, my name's Tanya. Sorry, I came in a bit late. I think that the students really want to do a good job. I think sometimes in the moment they jump to whatever their own reference points are, as opposed to maybe the theories and the modalities that they've learned. When it comes to just coming back to difficult students, I haven't had anything completely off the charts. I certainly have had student distress, and I'm sure you're all doing this, but I guess just for the sake of sharing, one of the things that has helped me is that establishing that kind of consent to supervision on that first session. And, you know, what does supervision actually mean? And I think a lot of them mistake supervision for, oh, it's just about support, like you support me and you tell me I'm doing a good job. And actually outlining that it's not just support, there's an education component, there's an accountability component in terms of duty of care, and a quality kind of assurance component. And I guess I kind of say to my students, you know, I'm going to treat you in the same way that I would my staff in working in, you know, in a workplace. And that means that, you know, this is how I propose that we communicate and we resolve things and we explore things. And I think if you set that up solidly at the beginning with expectations and you negotiate it together in a collaboration, it gives you that platform to be able to come back to it when you hit those hurdles, to be able to say, hey, remember we had this conversation, let's come back to what we know works in terms of to kind of resolve this or to work through this or to explore that. But I'm interested, what do other people do?
I think that's absolutely right. I think the foundation is separation straight up with the client, the expectation of what the supervision is, your expectation, their expectation, and I guess like a little contract between them. And then when things do hit the fan, it's like Paul said, come back to the Rogerian page, get to understand them, what's happening from their perspective, almost get into their shoes. And also get them to ask the question, or, you know, what am I doing? How can I help you with these areas here? How can we, you know, even if it's a conflict, okay, we've got the conflict about modeling. Well, let's talk about this conflict. It can be positive. We can both learn from it. But bring that client, you know, bring the student back into that realm where they feel comfortable and safe in that supervision role, so they can start to explore, so they can bring down their autonomic responses to a level where they can start think clearly and explore clearly. Yeah, it's definitely important. But also I think it's important for the students to understand that if things aren't working in supervision for whatever reason, that there is an avenue for them to explore as well. You know, maybe there's a conflict of interest or something, but there is a backing and there is someone else to go to.
I'm going to go to Max now, but just before I do, I just want to tie into something that Ian was saying there. We have had the discussion before about actually using that first week rather than doing a generic icebreaker to actually co-create a supervision contract. Now, I wouldn't go as far as putting it into a written, signed document, but just something that everyone does agree to. You are going to need to keep a record of it, because if things do start to go pear-shaped, you can then go, okay, I just want to pull you back to the group agreement that we had in week 1, and that was about you're not going to react emotionally if I have to give you feedback that's going to sound a bit critical. So I think it's a good use of that first week where you're trying to create a bond, where you're trying to get some communication going, rather than just something that's a bland, tell me about your favorite childhood holiday icebreaker, making it something that's grounded in the activity that you're going to be doing, and you can then use it later on. Okay, Max, who's posing as Elisa McLeod for some reason.
Yeah, something to do with the vet and the zoo. I don't know. Anyway, okay. Look, with the one that I've had that was a really, really, really difficult person. 2 things. One is that informal contract that you just discussed. I also say to them all at the beginning, I'm going to be taking notes throughout our sessions. That helps me remember. Blah blah blah. With that particular one, that gave me permission to write down every single word that he said, and that's what I did. I literally wrote down everything he said so that when it hit the fan, which it was inevitably going to do, I could actually transcribe. So that's number 1, is when the alarm bells go, I just write it all down and have that as my own record. Number 2, at that time, I came to you, Paul, and Kathy, and was able to receive additional support, which got me through managing him. And the other thing I did was I also let the group manage him, because there were people in that group who were able to challenge as a peer, and in fact use that process to then work further in the sessions with him. So I guess that's using the group to then use that to demonstrate without in any way there being victimization, or because that was never perceived by the student in question, so clearly wasn't felt, but just to let the group do some work together on, let's discuss this issue in a group way. So they're just my thoughts. And obviously these are on campus. These are campus groups, not online.
Yeah, but online it's just as easy to keep notes. I think that's a really good ground rule to set up at the beginning. I will take notes, and without sort of saying I'll use this in court if it comes to that, it does let them know that you are keeping records. One thing that we do struggle with in these units is the fact that because the assessments are graded as pass-fail, they're not trying to get a high distinction. 2, because there's not a structured lecture, I think some supervisors have a sense that I'm going to turn up and I'm going to have a bit of a chat about how things are going, but it's not necessarily anything that I need to take as seriously as my AOD lectures or my ethics lecture. I think we really need to be reiterating very, very clearly that this is probably the hardest unit that you're going to do, and you need to be prepared. You need to turn up with notes, and if you don't, I will point that out to you. And if you continue to not turn up with notes, then that is something that will ultimately fail you, because you're not practicing in a professional and ethical manner. And I think we need to keep pushing this on a regular basis and making sure that they do kind of get that this is something that they can't just turn up and have a chat. They must know what they're going to use the time for. Crystal?
Sorry, Paul. Apologies first for being late. I haven't received the email. I don't know what happened.
Oh, sorry.
But Max sent me the link, so I got on. Thanks, Max. I just wanted to say in relation to the seriousness of it, I guess, with which to encourage students to take the subject, is I often say to them in that very first introductory one that it's actually harder to get through a satisfactory, unsatisfactory than it is to pass a graded one, because you can't really be partly satisfactory. So, you know, you can't be 50% satisfactory. So you have to actually have almost a higher standard to get through this one than it would be to get a 50% mark in any other subject. And that takes them a little bit by surprise, because they do tend to downplay the satisfactory, unsatisfactory, is ungraded. And I said, well, actually, don't underestimate the difficulty of getting a satisfactory grade.
Yeah. Okay, John Falcon. We're not hearing you there, John. Have you got if you want to type, see if that
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can. Yep, that's
okay. It's my button. As a supervisor for APRA, as you all probably do as well, I have to do contracts with supervisees all the time, and I liked what you were saying, Paul, about you know, I always do a group agreement, and I think what I'm going to do now is more of a semi-structured contract with my students, which includes all the things that we're talking about, so that it's real clear with them at the very beginning what are your expectations and also my expectations. That's around timing, that's around assessments, that's around all the stuff we're talking about. And I really like this, because I'd like to be able to do this in my next supervision classes. So thanks, everyone. That was really great.
One thing that, yeah, I'll get to you in a second, Alan. One thing that I've been having discussions with Dennis and Kathy about this, in terms of what is the crossover between confidentiality in the supervision class and a necessity for the next supervisor to know what they're dealing with. Now, the majority of students, and I'm aware that Ian, Trevor and Joan have not done this work with us before, and I don't want you to feel that it's all going to be difficult, aggressive students. It's a very small number. But I do think, particularly in the case that Max was talking about, for the next supervisor to know what I'm dealing with. Now, the way that we're trying to have that discussion is the fact that we talk about the confidentiality loop in the supervision groups. So that's you guys and your clients, your supervisees, and within the loop is me, Kathy as head supervisor, I'll come back to that in a moment, Dennis as head of school, the individual campus managers, and the manager of placement. So that if something is coming up, you're not breaching confidentiality by saying, I need to talk to you about this particular student. What we're saying is the confidentiality loop also includes whoever's going to work with that supervisee next. Now, I think we still need to sort of nuance whether or not that's completely acceptable and ethical, or whether that's, you know, a student could say, oh, I'm being victimized because Max said I was aggressive in class, or Max said this. And should a student come into a new supervision group as a tabula rasa, where you know nothing about them and you find out all about them quite quickly? Or is it someone who, you know, it may take you 3 or 4 sessions of giving them the benefit of the doubt before you think, actually, I had a feeling you were quite racist. And it turns out you are. And really what Max could have told you was, yes, he was. And he made that very clear by the second week. So personally, I think we should be allowed to pass on to you as supervisors knowledge about who you're going to be working with. And not in a way of saying, this person just scraped through, see if you can fail them this time, see if you can catch them out. It's not about that. It's about pointing out or being aware of what you may need to point out as the weeks progress. Okay, who else? Okay, I'm going to go to Alan, and then I'm going to talk to Trevor.
Thanks, Paul. I'm just taking a step back to the management of students and difficult students. My way is that right from the word go, I approach this in a collaborative way, and almost the first words I'd say is that, you know, this is where the rubber hits the road. Everything you've learned up to date, it's going to pay out now. This is your opportunity, and I'm here to support that happening. And then I use a we rather than an I, because I support it being an our group, not my group, but an our group. And I said, we each have different roles in this group, and I have a specific role, and you have a specific role. We all call to perform that. I'm also mindful of the language. So I might use, I don't use the word contract, actually, because contract is implying that I have the contract because these are the terms of my contract. But an agreement for me is agreement is what I use, because we come to agreement and we decide together what the agreements are. And I do that in the first session always. Then I would type it up and I'll email it to all of them and say, you review this. If there's something you need to change or add or delete, then we'll discuss it next time, and we'll deal with it. And that seems to work. So the reference point to fall back on is always been, well, they are co-own that. So therefore, it's hard to be elusive and slip away through it. That's a fundamental principle that I use. And if there's a problem that arises and somebody's, I don't know, whatever difficult things that's going on, the first thing I'll do is try and use the group and say, look, this is our group. We are here to proactively look out for each other. So if something comes up, you know, then and that's usually comes into the agreement at the beginning, is that, you know, what is it that's going on, and what are the consequences? What's the impact on the whole group if something's going on? And each person can speak to the impact of them on the group, not to attack the other person, just their response. And then we'll come back to the person and give them a final say. And if need be, I will follow up a personal call afterwards if I think that they feel, I don't know, victimized or outside or ostracized or something like that, and work with them a little bit on that side. Those are the fundamental principles. So the fundamental principle, it's an hour process, and work that in that way.
Okay, I've just seen a message come through from Ian. Good point, that there's usually a handover process between supervisors. So I don't think we're looking at treading on people's toes in terms of confidentiality, because it's not about catching people out. It's about making sure that we're working with the best parts of their capacity, but also being aware that some parts of the way they've practiced so far seriously jeopardize their possibility of passing. Because this is such a nuanced area of practice, it can be quite hard to fail a student, because so much of it is your subjective interpretation of how someone is responding to your feedback. Even when it's marking their written paper, it's still a subjective reading of someone's telling of the story. So sometimes a student will slip through because we can't technically fail them, but you have that sense that this is someone who's not ready. And the second supervision unit, if there is some handover, if there is some feedback, then hopefully we can sort of hone in on the difficult parts of their practice and try and align them to what we think should be the way they're working by the time they graduate. Trevor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just to comment on first, the confidentiality question you raised. Excuse me. To me, it just seems simply something to include in their initial agreements or contracts, whatever you want to call them. That transparent what the process is with information that gets revealed within the sessions. So that was my thoughts on that, and then as Paul was saying, this is I've yet to run a supervision group here at ACAP. However, in dealing with difficult members, I think I'll draw on my experience as a running many process groups for students, therapy groups. And I have experienced many times over the years being, personally attacked and highly reactive behaviour amongst members, but also directed at me. And I guess my attitude generally now is that it's sort of partly, to expect that I was going to arise, it could come up at any time, and kind of I'm sort of okay with it, basically. I tend to try and distinguish between reactive behaviour and just like completely inappropriate aggressive behaviour, and make very strong sort of agreements at the beginning of whatever group I run that if any behaviour is inappropriate, I will intervene very strongly. But if it's reactive, maybe there's an opportunity to, because I can imagine if a supervisee is reacting towards the supervisor, well, there's something interesting happening there that it could be sort of a good work for the group to actually explore, and without shaming the supervisee at all, just to sort of kind of go with the flow and see and to find out what's underneath it, because I would imagine that maybe hitting on a button, really, that's possibly in the work between supervisee and their client. So that would be my broad approach, and I guess having yet to step into that space, I guess I'll find out how I'll deal with it if and when it arises. That's all I can say. But thank you.
I think that's a good point to tease out the difference between pure aggression and someone who is having an emotional response, because it is an emotional thing that we're asking them to do, and they may not be able to bracket their emotions off from how they feel about the clients who they're dealing with, or the fact that you may have had to say to them, you didn't do this as well as you could have. How do other people manage when they are trying to give that feedback, but the student's not getting it? One of the marking criteria is an ability to take feedback from the supervisor and incorporate that into their further practice. What happens if they're not doing that? Crystal?
I guess as soon as I feel that that's happening, I will have a one-on-one session with the student in between sessions, in between the supervision groups, and because I also take notes during the sessions, I can highlight to them exactly some of the things that they've said that are concerning, and we just have a discussion. And I find that really does help them. They don't feel quite so threatened in the group. They have time to process it with me, in a one-on-one session, and I find it much easier after that. There's only been one occasion where I've had to say that, okay, I will have to take this up further because, this isn't progressing, and I've discussed that with you and Kathy, where I had a student who was, endangering clients, I guess, by him working outside his area of expertise and just not able to understand how he was crossing boundaries. But mostly the private ones, having a one-on-one session does, I find, help.
This was something that Ione was really big on, the fact that you can't shame your client, you can't shame the students in any situation, and particularly in a small group where everyone is so exposed. If there is a need to be really pointed in the feedback, maybe that is something that is done privately. Obviously, there's a lot of learning in group supervision because everyone's learning from how other people are doing well or how other people are learning how to do something better. So it's going to be that decision you make on the day. Is this something that we discuss as a group and get other people's input into? Or is this just going to create more anxiety and more tension and more anger? And therefore it's better to spend a little time afterwards. Sylvia.
Oops. Yes, just like Crystal said, I usually, if I feel that the supervisee gets a bit prickly in the group, then I usually take it away and say, I'm going to give you a call tomorrow night and we'll have a bit of a chat about it. And Also, I make probably a general statement about taking feedback, that it's actually part of our agreement that I need to challenge the supervisee because my ethical eye is onto their client. So it's my ethical responsibility to challenge them if I feel they're not doing something, or they're not doing something in the best interest of their client. And sometimes just knowing that overarching thing, it's not me having a go at them, it's like I'm challenging them to become a better counselor, so they can be a better counselor for their client, so that my best interest is in their realm and in the client's realm. I find that usually helps, but I also do like a private little chat, because I don't want to publicly shame them in front of their participants, the other participants. Yeah.
Yeah, Max?
Yeah, I agree with you, Sylvia and Crystal. But on the other hand, if there are times when if somebody makes an incredibly homophobic statement in the middle of a group session, talking about a client or talking about a work colleague at their placement, obviously, I mean, the way we do it, I'll jump on that, and hopefully in an appropriate way. But I'll acknowledge if I'm really angry, I've got to really contain it and try and manage it as best I can. But that's also something I would immediately report back afterwards in writing to Paul or Kathy or whoever. So.
Okay, so when something like that happens, how do you react emotionally? And is that something you then need supervision around? If it's an offhand comment and you focus in on it and there's resolution, that's one thing. But again, and people don't know the student who Max and I are talking about, but he will create an emotional reaction with almost every person who he's met. So how, in that case, did you cope in the face of ongoing challenging attitudes and behaviours and often hostility?
To some extent, I think, as I said before, with that particular person, the group was a mature group who had amazing jumping in comments that were incredibly appropriate, incredibly well done. So it was very helpful. I could endorse what the group was saying, or I could endorse other statements and draw them out. For me afterwards, writing it down is really helpful, because at least I'm getting it out. So I'm writing it as it's being said, and then immediately afterwards I'm going, vent on paper, because that works for me after the group's gone, and then making sure I send an email immediately or that I get back to base, so that I feel I've offloaded it. So that's what I do with it. And sitting in the moment going, okay, just hold it in here, just self to get through it, as you would do in any other situation, I guess. But it was fortunate that I had a mature group who were able to work in this way. And we're considering it was only it was 3031. It was pretty helpful.
Yeah, particularly as you're sitting there for 3 hours in that environment. And I think that's another important point. Processing it and documenting it as soon as it happens. I know in times when I've come to make client notes after an event, I very quickly lose the detail. I very quickly lose the nuance or the emotional response to what was happening. So I think doing things as quickly as you can is really going to be beneficial. Now, I did mention Kathy before. I'm not sure if people are aware, she is now working as the academic head of campus. So she has the position that Eileen Davis had in Sydney. Eileen's now left us, which is a great loss to us. It's also a bit of a loss to us in the supervision team, because she's now pulling back somewhat on the role she's had with us as head supervisor. So in terms of supervision of the supervisors in 2017, we're not sure who that's going to be at this stage. We're somewhat light in terms of full-time counselling staff with experience to do supervision. So that's something that Dennis is going to have to be trying to figure out who's going to do that. Okay, now I've just seen a wee note here. I'm going to read it. In terms of translatability to the workplace, is there a way for us to use performance management as a tool of accountability? Is that from you, Tanya?
Yeah, that was from me. I guess I'm listening to everybody, and I'm thinking about the way that we model to our students the way that we would be in the workplace, and we do that with contracting for supervision. We do that with our communication processes, and I guess thinking back to what you were saying, is it Elisa? What you're saying about, sorry, Emma, what you're saying about, you know, how do we navigate that with difficult students? And I guess I'm thinking, you know, if that was in the workplace and clients were at risk, I would be performance managing and I would be communicating what that looks like. And I guess in the conversations I have with students, I equate what we do to what you will find in the workplace. Like, this is as someone said before, this is where the rubber meets the road. And so, you know, it's not just practice anymore. You know, I'll hold you to the same standards that I would hold a staff member. So how do we negotiate this? And I wonder, in terms of ACAP, what kind of structures could we put in place so that's not about that a student slides through but we have really serious concerns about their ethical behaviour, but how can we hold them accountable to say, all right, well, you have to work on this, you know, or write an extra essay on that, or show to us that you are engaging in reflective thinking about this and considering the impacts. Or I'm just wondering how we might be able to use that more constructively.
The challenging part with that idea is if a student has been able to show that they can tick off the learning outcomes for the unit, we can't fail them. And it's really hard.
With the structure then, Paul? Is that a problem with the marking criteria?
Yes.
And I guess my concern is that it's not enough. It's not enough. We need like an extra statement that allows us the scope to be able to have this measure of accountability. And I don't have the answer. I'm really throwing a spanner in the works, but
yeah. Well, it's the most important spanner, because that's what the early part of the discussion is centering around. We're trying to quantify a subjective impression of someone's being operating at a skill level. You're only hearing their version of what they're doing. It's a subjective assessment of someone's maturity. It's an assessment of someone's emotional reactivity to their clients or to you. And of course, Murphy's Law is the students who are the most reactive and the most difficult are the ones who will make it the most difficult, proving how good they are.
Not dissimilar to the workplace, though. You know, like I think it's still, you know, the parallel is still there in terms of navigating that difficulty. And most of our supervision, unfortunately, is via self-report. I mean, you know, most of us in the workplace don't have the opportunity. It's a luxury to be able to sit in the room and witness the work. And so it's the same dilemma, isn't it? You know, it's about, well, if all I've got to go off is the self-report and the observations I make in the classroom, then I have to hypothesize that that's going to play out on the placement. I don't know. Yeah, sorry.
Paul, I just have I actually agree with that. I think that it's a really good idea to try and use a workplace performance thinking, I guess. The marking criteria seems to me that we are applying an academic marking criteria to a subject that is essentially non-academic in lots of ways. It is that subjective assessment. Could we have something like, just thinking more broadly, something like a code of conduct or something that all the supervisees sign? Because that is something in the workplace that staff are held accountable to.
And that ties into the message that's just come through from John, where he said he factors that into that group agreement or group contract right from the start.
But I think if it is sent out to sort of all supervisees, then we are all starting at the same baseline, where from the same point of foundation base for all students, and therefore it becomes more equitable. So all supervisors know that the students have actually read and understood, and that is something that in the workplace, people are held to.
Are people able to think of ways in which we could amend the marking criteria, which would be a whole process of going through committees, so that there would actually be a way that we can really hone in and have marking criteria that do identify reactivity, for instance. Now, I'm going to go to Leander first, and then Michelle, and then Willa.
I just started to type something. Hi, everyone. I was just wondering, in the old days for social, legal, ethical issues, the final assessment was a counselling session, and that was used as a gatekeeping measure. Whether we would actually graduate the student or not, depending on how they performed in that session and how they critique themselves. So I'm wondering, can we bring in something like that so they have their paper? And of course, we hold them accountable all the way through from that original learning contract, as John has just written there. He goes back and refers to that all the way through, as do I. But something extra at the end. So you have the paper, but you also have a session, or half a session or something, where they're critiquing themselves and they're bringing in the theory. And I think that would maybe be helpful as well as another gatekeeping measure. I don't know how others feel about that.
Did the ethics unit actually succeed as a gatekeeping function? Because we are still getting challenging students right at the end of their degree.
Yeah, well, it did. I'm going way back to the early days of ACAP when we used it in Elizabeth Street, and that was a very helpful. I think that was a good gatekeeping measure at that time, and we did pick up students and say, look, this person is not ready to graduate, and they're right at the end of their course, and that's when that particular unit was run, right at the very end in their last semester. So, I mean, maybe a combination of, maybe not in the supervision unit, but in some unit at the very end where they have to present a final counselling session that shows that they are well skilled and can critique themselves. They're critically reflective.
Okay, but that's counselling skills. How does that tie to being reflective in the supervision space? And we don't have to come up with an answer today.
Yeah, no, just thinking in the moment. Yeah, something may come.
Yeah. Okay, let's have a chat to Michelle, and then Willa, and then Stuart.
Hi. I had a similar thought to Leander in terms of, I know it's going to create a lot more marking, but either a presentation, an assignment which includes a video and a critique, and also a presentation in group, so that other students can see it in pictures. I know I did that when I did my training. I think I did 3. And while it was anxiety-provoking, it was really helpful. I think we had to learn, say, what we did well, what we could have done differently, and referenced. So, what skills, what theories did I use, and why was I doing it? Quite similar to their case conceptualization, but sort of more in the moment.
Where was that training at?
J&I.
I was going to say, because at J&I, that was an assessment that we used, and it created huge anxiety, but it really forced them to be aware of what they were doing. And when they got through it, they went, gosh, that was hard, and gosh, I learned a lot. So, and
I found using my worst bits was the most effective learning.
Sorry,
even though it was a bit shaming. I actually presented what I thought was bad work, or stuff that I probably didn't do as well, and I got the most out of it.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, Willa. Hang on, I'm just going to unmute you, Willa. Okay.
Just a quick thought, really, that, without having to do a whole elaborate thing, that maybe in the marking criteria for supervision, there is a section that really is satisfactory, unsatisfactory, and demonstrating ethical and social awareness, both within supervision and within client work presented.
There is
So
one
that,
marking criteria that talks about student is able to operate ethically. I can't remember how we phrase it, but we do kind of touch in on that.
we do, but we could make it more, it's like you've got to get past that particular criteria, and it's framed more clearly in terms of, you know, racist, homophobic, these kind of concerns, so that, you know, it's really explicit what's meant rather than some kind of vague sense of being ethical.
Well, it really just says ethical as a catch-all.
Yes.
Really digging down into what we actually want from it. And I think I need to talk to, I don't know, someone in, I'm not even sure which department, but to find out, can we have specific criteria that they must be satisfactory in? Because they can be unsatisfactory in some tasks, but still pass the overall if they're overall good. But can we have critical marking criteria where they must pass that or they don't get through?
Yes.
Okay, Stuart?
I may be losing. It's difficult, isn't it? Because we're sort of not specific about what cases we're trying to catch with what net. I tend to be in favour of the vagueness, if you like, of the marking criteria we have at the moment. You know, if someone's explosive and homophobic, which seems to be the sort of example we've been circling, there's difficulties in the case conceptualisation. At the heart of our practice, we need to be able to work with difference. So if they're homophobic, they've failed. Work effectively and ethically with clients, they've failed. Participate effectively in the supervision process, they've failed if they're being explosive and homophobic. So, as Dennis once pointed out, because it is so subjective, you can make these marking criteria do practically whatever you need them to do. And I can't see that there's a hole there for someone to slip through who is explosive and is of some form racist, homophobic, whatever it might be.
Or just reactive.
And if we start to try and sort of be more precise, chances are we'll create more holes because there'll be all of these various contingencies that we won't have allowed for.
Well, is it then just a case of making sure that students do tick off that ethical marking criteria and the ability to present and the ability to take on feedback? And they're the key ones. If they fail those, they fail the unit. Yeah, you muted, Stu.
Yeah, it works for me. That would be a fail for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I'm aware that it's just gone 6. Crystal, you missed the first 10, 15 minutes or so, but I have recorded this, so I'll flick you through so you can listen at leisure to that last wee bit. And I'll also send it on to folks who were going to turn up who haven't managed to make it. So I'm just going to turn the recording off now.